Hi, and welcome to Filmmakers Compass Podcast, a show where we talk about movies and, well, more movies. I'm D-Man, joined by CP. And CP, how are you doing today?
Dude, I am really excited about this upcoming weekend.
Yes, me too. I don't know if we're going to talk about that yet or on next week's episode.
Oh, no, it's going to be a teaser. So everyone, you got to check out next week to find out why I am so excited.
I am too, and I'm sure we'll be posting about it. We'll have some photos. We're actually going to be doing something movie-related together, which should be fun. It's like you go, I go, and then we meet here and talk about it. But this time, we will be going to the theater together, so that should be pretty cool. Nice teaser. I'm looking forward to talking about that. So that should be pretty sweet.
I figured you would be.
Well, I do have some shout outs this week, CP. And first up is Abraham, who said, dude, both Rebel Moon might be in consideration for comedy of the year, which is not a good start because those are not comedies.
Yeah,
so
Zack Snyder, man.
For anybody that doesn't know, Rebel Moon Part 2, what is it? The Scargiver, released on Netflix this previous week. That people do have thoughts. So CP, depending on what the listeners want to hear, we may get into this. We talked about part 1. Once both of us have finished Rebel Moon Part 2, we might do a deeper dive. But right now, we'll leave it up to some of the shout-outs. So next up is Boone, who says, good God, I just finished Rebel Moon Part 2. As usual, Zack Snyder's special effects, fight scenes, and slow-mo are the best part. But yikes, what a mess. Way better than the first one, but still inexcusable for the amount of money invested in this. Then again, maybe the R-rated Snyder cut will be better, which I feel like is becoming Zack Snyder's MO. Seriously. Like, why don't they just if the Snyder cut is always better, why don't they just make and release that movie?
Well, especially for Netflix, where it's not like Zack Snyder is fighting with movie theaters and worrying about this theatrical runtime. It's on Netflix. Netflix doesn't care. Let him make the movie he wants to make.
Yeah, I don't get, what his whole shtick is with like everything. He's like, oh, it was way better, but we had to cut it. You're like, well, then stop doing that and just make awesome movies. Like, why do you keep making crappy versions and then needing to release a separate cut that you're like, this is totally superior? But on the flip side, that means you get double the releases, double the press coverage, and he is able to get people talking about the extended cut for long periods of time. I feel like there's it's almost like this catch-22 though. Like, people are gonna get over the idea of having extended release cuts. They're just gonna be like, stop, just make good shit.
Just get it right the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so weird, man.
I know. I mean, and it's associated with him specifically. He's done this now multiple times and spoken about other movies that don't have it multiple times. I don't know. This is his MO.
And just while we're talking about Rebel Moon, can I just say, I really was hoping that this would be great. But the fact that I actually stopped and finished the movie the next day is just a testament to it's not as good as it could have been. Because if it was great, I would have pushed everything else aside and finished it.
I'm generally not even a huge fan. I know Boone mentioned slow-mo. I really don't care for slow-mo unless it's like deliberate in something that it's doing. It just feels grandiose. Like, how do we like drag this out a little bit more when you're like, honestly, I think things look better. Like, imagine if Obi-Wan fighting Darth Maul had like slow-mo. I don't want it.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I don't know. I'm not a fan. Like, occasionally there might be something or a style that warrants it actually being there. But in most fight scenes, like, you see it in his, Justice League stuff. Like, he does, you're like, you don't need it. You don't need it.
Yeah.
Drucker chimes in and says, listening to the new episode right now, saw this and thought of you guys since you speak about it. Thank you, Drucker, for chiming in. I know CPU responded and said, glad to hear you're listening. And he said, yeah, of course, I've got lots of time, especially at nighttime during baby feedings. I'm glad I did and glad you guys enjoyed it. So thank you, Drucker. We appreciate that. Jack actually chimed in, CP, and this was directed solely at you. She thinks that you only watch Dune.
I mean, I wish I could only watch Dune, but occasionally I do go see another movie. Occasionally.
So, yeah, I guess, he's got to put that A-list. He's got to get his money's worth for A-list, and it can't all be Dune. Can it?
No, they don't show it that many times. It's only like once a day now.
Well, speaking of Dune Part 2, Matt Hellison has finally seen Dune Part 2, and CP, he has thoughts.
I don't even want to. This guy sucks. Just don't even finish giving him time on this show.
They were not positive about Dune 2, so I don't know. I feel like us talking about why we think he would hate it would be a disservice to his actual opinion, which he deserves. So who knows? Being one of the only people who didn't like it, we might have to bring him on for a segment of the show and go.
No, why? Why are we even acknowledging this guy? Like, we should just ignore him until he withers away and dies.
Well, I'm voting as one half of this podcast that we bring him on. So we might
it's gonna be a stalemate because I'm voting no. Why do I want Matt Helson on this show?
I like how it's riling you up. I feel like this is what I want, and Matt Helson might be the right person to do this. So
this guy sucks.
Might have to happen.
Movies with him. I don't.
And then lastly, on shoutouts, Alyssa Stackhouse said, "I miss buying tickets at the door." Now, I can actually agree with this from a nostalgic standpoint, but I don't miss the lines. Now I like buying my movie tickets ahead of time and just being able to walk in and go straight to the ticket taker or the ticket scanner, I guess. We don't even have physical tickets anymore. But you know what I do miss though, CP? I do miss like the actual box office where they would list the movie times and they had posters and like they were promoting the movies that were there, you know? And I think even, you know, our friend Sean, different people have collected movie tickets through the years, and it's like you can't even do that anymore. It's just digital. I mean, I suppose they could make like NFTs, but what a joke.
It's kind of weird. It's actually very strange that the AI guy here is the one who's advocating for the manual person putting the movie titles up on the marquee.
I mean, I'm looking right behind you on your setup. For anybody that's just listening, CP literally has a movie ticket up there.
Oh, you know, yeah, but I'm the guy that hates AI. So, of course, I would be advocating for it. I'm like, why are you is what I'm wondering.
For our video podcast listeners, I mean, look at this. I got movie tickets right here. I don't know why this isn't a part of my set, CP.
I don't know. You know?
Right there. Admit one. Yeah. I guess we like movie tickets, but that's about it. I don't like lines, so I hope the robots get rid of all the lines. That would be fantastic.
I don't know what to tell you, D-Man. I do miss old school movie theaters. That was the best. Walking up and buying a ticket.
Definitely.
And then there's sometimes where you go buy a ticket for a movie and you're just totally ashamed that you're going to it. And you're like, yeah, I have no business going to this movie.
I know. People look at you like you look around to make sure nobody's...
You're really going to see Sweet Home Alabama again, sir?
You are.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
That happened. So, yeah.
All right. It is our box office breakdown. We have to talk about, well, what is hot in the box office. So let's actually jump ahead to the worldwide box office in honor of Matt Helson. Because his favorite movie, Dune Part 2, is still holding strong. It has passed the $700 million threshold.
Nice.
So, I mean, it was a great payday for Warner Brothers, who also retains the number 2 spot internationally with Godzilla versus Kong, the New Empire, which has made over $500 million. We
knew that would do well internationally.
Number 3 for the year is Kung Fu Panda 4, kind of the same thing, over $500 million. The number 4 spot, D-Man, is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which is closing in on $200 million.
I'm not sure what that movie would need to make to break even, but I'm assuming that's not the smashing success they were hoping for. But I also get the impression that they didn't pour a ton of money into it. 200 million is probably close to break even, if not maybe a little profitable.
Yeah. Now, jumping over to the domestic box office. Now, we've had a couple new movies open up this past week. Because of that, there have been some changes about. The sad thing is Dune is down to number 9 in the box office, so it's about to drop off real quick.
It's coming out of theaters.
Only made $2 million over the weekend, despite my best effort to go as many times.
You can't spend $2 million.
The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare has dropped out of the top 5. It is in the 6th spot, which is not boding well for Henry Cavill as a leading man or Guy Ritchie as a director. So we need to change that, folks. Get out there and go watch it. It's amazing. Number 5.
I have a question about that. Now, is that in a wide release or is that in a limited release?
No, it's in wide release.
Seriously? Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Okay. Yeah, I got to go see that.
You absolutely need to. It's an awesome movie.
Okay.
Number 5 in the box office, Abigail, which premiered last weekend at number 2. So that is quickly dropping out.
I bet that tracks, though. They probably predicted that.
Probably just a weekend, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
heard the reviews weren't that good. Everyone I know who saw it was
Probably cheap to
disappointed.
make.
Yeah.
Bring in a big take, and then whatever else is just cake.
Right. Number 4, Civil War, which was at number 1. It is now down to the 4th spot. So I think that is about done in the domestic box office. And as we said, I don't think it's going to garner a lot of international viewership just based on the nature of the film.
Thematically, I don't think it plays well overseas. And 2, I think it is a certain type of movie where I think if you wanted to see it, you probably have by now. And then that's
so,
it.
Obviously, it has now made over $50 million, just north of $56 million, which A24 spent $50 million making that movie. So that's a solid payday. Yet from an accounting standpoint, it still has not officially made its money back yet.
Yeah, that can be frustrating because that's like the business of movie making, right? Is yes, A24 has put out some thought-provoking and lower budget films that maybe big studios aren't even interested in making, which is great. But as you start ramping up your production budgets, it's like, hey, you need a lot more people to go see this movie. And then, yeah, you start competing directly, right? Civil War is no longer this low budget movie vying for a certain moviegoers' attention. Now you're competing directly with Kong vs. Godzilla and Dune Part 2. Like, you're in that conversation. Like, what movie do I want to see?
So we'll and I know that this has been one of the most profitable films A24 has ever made, but we have to remember this is also the most expensive film A24 has ever made. So they can't be celebrating just yet. We'll have to see how things really play out.
Yeah. And I mean, they could still, on the back end, you have streaming and all that. It's possible that it's a very successful movie for them. But box office wise, it seems like it's not a smashing success.
Yeah. And then again, still holding that number 3 spot is Godzilla Kong, which did not shift at all from the previous week.
That is literally just like a testament to IP. Right. And also just delivering on your promise. That movie's like watch monsters fight. And you're like, okay, I don't expect much of it.
Yeah, people who want to see it, that's what they're getting.
But I'm guessing, yeah, it's like, hey, you want to go see that? Like everybody knows who Godzilla and King Kong are.
Yeah, right. Number 2, premiering in the box office this past weekend is Unsung Hero. And number 1, also opening this weekend, was Challengers, starring Zendaya. Did you by any chance see that?
I did not see it, although I heard it's definitely a little bit more risque than what Hollywood's been putting out recently. It's also a shift in tone for her when you think she's been doing things like Spider-Man and Dune. I mean, that's actually probably pretty good for an actress. Not only is she sort of the highest billed name in this project, which shifts her from being sort of a supporting character in those mega franchises to, again, in a starring role, but also like keeps audiences on their toes on what to expect from the movies that she's in.
Exactly. Another interesting thing when we look at the domestic box office is this past week, we were actually treated to a number of cinematic re-releases.
How fun.
We have been talking about Spider Mondays. And as of now, Spider Mondays have generated over $2 million in income for Sony Pictures, which is a pretty good deal.
Pretty good. Yeah, for a re-release.
Really, and the numbers we're looking at is Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2.
And I don't know about the theaters by you, but they were only showing at like 7 and 7:30. It was only like 2 showings. It's not like it was like a blocked out whole day that people spent going to watch Spider-Man. It's like there's only a couple showings. That's probably really good. My theaters were packed.
And that's only a couple hundred theaters that are even showing Spider Mondays. So
right, that's like pretty good.
Not bad. Now, Universal re-released The Mummy from 1999 as a 25th anniversary special edition re-release, and that generated over $1 million for them.
Did you see that in theaters?
Of course I did. I was not going to pass up the chance to go see that movie. I always loved that movie when I was a kid.
To Jack's point, that's basically Dune.
It is. It pretty much is. And then the movie that I did not see, and I really wish I did, Alien, the original Ridley Scott Alien, was re-released for the 40th anniversary. It has generated over $1.5 million for Walt Disney Studios. So pretty cool. It is kind of strange how many re-releases we are seeing in the theaters at this time, but I'm not going to complain about it. I mean, I love watching good movies in the movie theater, and some of those are great movies.
I will say we talked about this in an earlier segment on a few episodes back, but there are a couple studios that are hitting that 100-year milestone. And it does seem like for just the milestone, they're sort of re-releasing some of their biggest hits in theaters. Disney did this last year where or they might even still be doing it this year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It might have extended into this year, but yeah, they release a bunch of their biggest hits, which is kind of cool. That's fun. And I'm glad that at A-List with AMC, which shout out, you can go see these movies. You know, sometimes when they do like special side presentations, that's not included, but these are. So, well, that does it for our box office breakdown. Thank you, CP. And before we jump into our main topic this week, which is really a continuation of our topic from last week, also wanted to bring up our news segment where we talk a little bit about some of the things that have popped up in pop culture. So, the Pop Culture Minute.
Pop Culture Minute. Let's get into it. I don't know about you, D-Man, but I think the most exciting thing from this past week was the trailer for the new Mufasa movie.
Yes, and I hope you had a chance to watch it. I mean, it was, I think, only like 2 minutes long, so I hope you could squeeze it in.
Between all my Dune watching and Rebel Moon Part 2 watching, I managed to find some time.
Oh, good. Yeah, I actually checked out the trailer, and honestly, I think the trailer did a decent job. Obviously, it's self-titled after the main character, Mufasa, and it basically just, chronicles his arrival as king. I'm sure we'll see some familiar faces, Scar, Rafiki, Zazu. I'm sure some of the characters will be in this movie. I don't know. I think for fans of The Lion King, they did enough with this trailer to be like, did you like the live action Lion King? If you did, it's more of that.
Yeah, also, I feel like they tried to hint a little bit more out of the story in the sense that this is a lion and he, at the time, is not king, right?
No.
This is going
in fact,
to be
they say
Mufasa's...
he has no nobility at all.
And this is his rise to power. So based off of that, we can see that we're watching something kind of the opposite of the Lion King. So I guess, kind of that thing we always get back to is, what is the reason for telling this story? Apparently, this is a very different journey from what we have seen before with The Lion King. So, I guess point Disney.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I mean, I guess considering, right, that becoming king is sort of Simba's birthright and he's born into nobility. Here they're saying like, how would that journey look if you went a different route? How do you take over the pride? And I don't know. Will I see it? I did not see the live action Lion King in theaters.
I've never seen it.
I have Disney Plus. It's been on before, but it was all right. I still prefer the animated version, but there is no animated version of this, which makes me think that maybe it's worth giving a shot if I'm interested in that story. And I kind of am. I've been a Lion King fan since 1995 and, a Shakespeare fan since 1995. Yeah, so maybe I will. Maybe I'll give Mufasa a chance. Where I think when we talked about, a few weeks ago, we did the episode where we were talking all the things that came out of CinemaCon. Mufasa was really low on my list of exciting things.
Yeah, I agree.
I was kind of like, is this just a cash grab? What are they going for here? And I still feel that way to a certain extent, the same as with almost all of the live actions, an opportunity to retell the same story for a new generation, but also print money. I think we know that innately. This is one where they're, like I said, I'm maybe willing to give it a chance simply because they're not just remaking a story that I already know and think plays better in animation. This could be kind of cool. Maybe.
I don't hate it as much as I thought I did. I still hate it, less so.
One of the things I also wanted to talk to you about was Pop Culture Minute. I don't know if you heard word from Zack Snyder about what the official ending of the Justice League Snyder Cut was going to be, because he went ahead and sort of filled in all the gaps, because my guess is this is definitively the end of the wishful thinking for a completion of the Snyderverse. I mean, he's revealed what's going to happen. It actually played out a little bit like Avengers Endgame with Darkseid. Superman, I mean, essentially, if you haven't read the article, Zack Snyder basically says that Superman fights Darkseid kind of falls to his will, and the nightmare realm or the nightmare world that was envisioned by Bruce Wayne comes to be a reality until Superman snaps out of it. There's an epic battle, and then they restore the world as it was before the nightmare and defeat Darkseid.
Yay! I mean,
that actually sounds really cool. I think I did a good job telling that.
I think it was a good pitch. I'm totally psyched, and we'll watch that movie if Zack Snyder ever convinces Warner Brothers to give him $1 billion and make it twice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'll tell you what,
cut and the extended cut.
Yeah, like I'll probably check out and shit on the theatrical version and then wait for the Snyder cut for another 5 or 6 years, and then finally that'll be the version I want. Yeah. That would be pretty cool. But I mean, I don't know. It was just kind of a little admission, I think, from Snyder himself that like this is never going to happen. Or it was like the ultimate tease. This is the last chance to try to get everybody to be like, we want this movie.
Well, I know one of the big pushes that Snyder's had over the last couple months has been to try and allow DC to let him finish it as an animated film series.
Never going to happen.
But I don't think it's going to happen.
No. The fans, I don't know. We'll see. I doubt there's enough momentum now. I think people are fine with, we got the Snyder Cut Justice League, which was superior. So take a win when you can get one. But all right, CP, that does it for our Pop Culture Minute this week. All right, so our main topic this week, CP, is really a continuation of our topic last week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it and hope you enjoyed last week's topic on Spider-Man, but more specifically, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the Tobey Maguire version of Spider-Man. Well, today, we just want to dive a little bit deeper into the other live-action versions of Spider-Man. So we will not be talking Spider-Verse on this episode. That's probably a whole podcast in and of itself because there's a lot there to talk about. But when we get into the live action version, CP, I'm going to throw it over to you. Did you see the Amazing Spider-Man movies in the theater?
No, I didn't. I know everyone is going to find this to be so shocking. I was so angry at the decision to kind of just hack up the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man series we were getting since they were in talks and pre-production on a Spider-Man 4.
Correct.
And just move ahead with a full-on reboot with the Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield that I actually boycotted it, and I didn't see it until a few years ago. I know you were all so shocked that I would have the gall to not watch a movie out of pure spite, but yeah, I actually did.
Shocked. Yeah, I actually did not see them in theaters either. Now, at the time, I think I fell right in. I was not boycotting. I actually was excited, but at the same time, I think my attention was totally on the MCU. This is like prime MCU years. This is right after Avengers. You know, we are in Winter Soldier territory, Guardians 1. And I'm not going to lie, I think I was just all in on the MCU. And at that time, I wasn't all that interested in following stories that weren't contributing to that overall narrative.
That's fair.
If I had, you know, Movie Pass or A-List or some version of this sort of subscription service where I could go to as many movies as I want, I probably would have gone back then. I was just more selective about the movies that I'm going to go see. And I was just all in on the MCU. I miss those days. The MCU was so dope at that time. It was literally like top notch. But as far as the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies go, I mean, I will say this, having seen them, but never seen them on the big screen. The things that really stand out to me from those series, first of all, I like that the director's last name was Webb. That was cool and very appropriate. I also thought that Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker was a great casting. The chemistry that he had with Gwen Stacy, but I'm sure her name is eluding me. Emma Stone. Yes, which congratulations, Emma. Yes, I thought the chemistry they had on screen was awesome. Now, apparently, like all the live action Spider-Man versions, this also extended off screen, which is wild. Like I didn't know that all of the actors like dated each other. Tom Holland and Zendaya, Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst and Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield. And then apparently, I don't know if you know this either, CP, but all of the women who played Peter Parker's love interests then went on to play a tennis star in a tennis movie, Challengers being the newest version.
No, are you serious?
I'm dead serious.
Because I know Kristen Dunst was in Wimbledon, but what was the one Emma Stone was in?
She was in with like Billie Jean King, I think, where she...
No way!
Yeah. where they had that like man versus woman match.
Yeah. Who
So
knew?
yeah, they've all gone. Now I don't know if most actresses end up in tennis movies. That may just be a coincidence.
I can't think of that many tennis movies. But
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that seems very coincidental.
specific.
Yeah, they all dated and they all were in tennis movies. But anyway, particularly between them, I think all three of those live action versions of Spider-Man and his love interest all had chemistry. But particularly, I mean, I may actually in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 love that version of the chemistry between Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy the most. I like their sort of high school age, and I like that he's the Peter Parker version that is comic accurate versus I think the Tom Holland version, right? We have Iron Man in there. It's sort of a different take on high school age Peter Parker.
Yeah.
A little bit different than it is, in this version, which I like. Because I feel like Tobey Maguire, he's in high school for like a quarter of the first movie, and then it's over.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Like he's an adult. So this is like the Peter Parker high school version that we sort of wanted. And in Amazing Spider-Man 2, they move on to graduation and what they're going to do after. And you can sort of see the seedlings for an Amazing Spider-Man 3 that never happened, which
I think is a huge shame.
I don't know. Having seen them, but not on the big screen, I mean, would they be Spider-Man movies that you would actually recommend? Because I mean, Spider-Man 2 is an easy recommend for me. That's one of my favorite comic book movies of all time.
I mean, I think they're fine. Like if you're a Spider-Man fan, watch them. But if I met someone who had never seen Spider-Man, I wouldn't be like, you know what? You should go watch The Amazing Spider-Man because that's going to make you sold on who Spider-Man is as a character. So
and I really liked Andrew Garfield, the Peter Parker in the Spider-Man suit. I liked his sarcasm and jokiness. I like how he embodied this sort of fun version of Spider-Man. You get glimpses of it in the Raimi version where he has these sort of one-liner quips. I thought that was really fun, and they did that really well. So I enjoyed that too. This is just my opinion, which is ironic given the direction that I think Sony wanted to take the Amazing series, which is they had envisioned a shared universe with the Sinister Six as the villains. And the irony about the two Amazing Spider-Man movies that we got is I would argue that the villains are actually pretty weak. And I feel like if you're going to do a Sinister Six sort of shared universe within this Spider-Man world, the villains would need to be top notch. They would need to be absolutely incredible so that we'd be like, oh my God, like how is Peter Parker going to like fight these guys?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is the first one the one with Doc Connors?
Yes, the lizard.
The second one is the one with Electrode and Rhino and
Electro. I mean, Rhino shows up, but I mean, literally, it's almost a cameo.
It's stupid.
Yeah, and then you have the Green Goblin. Harry becomes a version of the Green Goblin in that. But again, it's sort of done very haphazardly. And the Amazing Spider-Man 2 runs into that same problem that Spider-Man 3 runs into. So they didn't learn their lesson, which is there's too many villains. There's too many things going on in one story. It's just way over the top. I will say, and this is a spoiler alert, so if you have not seen these movies, turn this off now or skip ahead like 5 minutes. I mean, I will say the most well done scene is the Gwen Stacy scene.
First of all, it tests the character of Peter, right? It shows the consequences of his actions. I think Andrew Garfield delivers in making us feel like he is really broken after the incident. And it is fairly comic accurate based off of what we've seen in the books and then what we finally see on the big screen.
And I know what happens, and it was still shocking when I saw it. I was like, oh my God, that was brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's terribly, terribly sad. Just as it is in the comics, which, I was explaining to Steph, I'm like, in the comics, the Gwen Stacy scene, I think it's on the George Washington Bridge and not a clock tower.
Yeah,
in the comics, but it's like one of the most famous, sort of mainstream comic scenes in that it's a rare instance of a character sort of dying. There's alternate versions of Gwen Stacy that pop up, but like she dies.
Well, and obviously for the character of Spider-Man, it's a linchpin moment, right?
I mean, it changes.
It affects him forever. That's really important. And again, watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where we see the Gwen Stacy character serve the role that she plays for Peter Parker, it just focuses more on the failure that the Raimi one was by introducing her for 30 seconds and really wasting the opportunity to truly test Spider-Man.
It's actually interesting too, because if you think about it, MJ, Mary Jane Watson, in the Raimi trilogy, because they're in high school for such a little amount of time, I think they were like, let's just make it MJ. But I mean, in the comics, in high school, it's Gwen Stacy, at least in the Amazing comic book series,
Yep.
Amazing Spider-Man. This actually was a little bit more comic accurate. And even though, again, they sort of do a tip of the cap to the George Washington Bridge scene in Spider-Man 1 with MJ, they don't follow through on it. He actually is able to save her, thank God. But here, even though it's not on a bridge, which I think it would have been if they hadn't already done that scene in Spider-Man 1.
No, I agree.
Aesthetically,
feels too much like a ripoff, right?
Yeah, like don't do it again. Just do it somewhere else. It worked really well because it was tragic. So the question is, they're doing Spider Mondays. So now, CP, you have an opportunity to go see the Amazings in the theaters. Do you think they're worthy of a theater viewing?
I think I am going to see the first Amazing Spider-Man in the theater. I don't think I'm going to see the second one, but I think I'll check out the first one because I never did see it.
Okay. Yeah, Steph and I were talking about we're probably going to try to go if we can still get seats. I love Spider-Man. He's like the one character that I'm always like, can he just like get what he wants? Like at the end of Spider-Man 2, when MJ like shows up at his door, I'm like, oh my God, yes. And he's like, thank you, Mary Jane Watson. Peter Parker finally for once gets the thing he wants most, because man, he's always getting the shaft.
Yeah, right.
Can't make his rent. His Uncle Ben dies. He kills his girlfriend. Apparently in later Spider-Mans, no one knows who he is anymore.
Yeah,
he's lonely. Yeah, right. Like there's so many things where you're like, oh my gosh, this guy, just be happy. So yeah, I do. Yeah. Well, okay. So while we're talking about the Amazing Spider-Mans, then we'll shift over a little bit to the Tom Holland and the MCU versions of Spider-Man. But what I want to talk about is, how did you feel about all three of these live action franchises coming together in No Way Home? So again, more spoilers. We're going to talk.
So are we just jumping in No Way Home, or are we going to start back with the other?
Go ahead and start with the other ones. We'll get there eventually.
Again, what I liked about Homecoming is, again, we're seeing a slightly different version of high school Peter Parker. I think Tom Holland does a great job of conveying, adolescent Peter Parker with superpowers. I think that's very much how someone who, is 15 years old would behave, getting your
he's like right? Building the Lego Death Star in his room, obviously connected to the larger overall MCU, but they sort of ground Homecoming in, is it Queens? That's where Spider-Man's from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like they kind of bring it back to this ground level, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and try to like make it feel a little bit more like the comics.
Now remember, this is not the first time that we've seen MCU Spider-Man. That was Civil War. Correct. But this is the first time we're actually getting to experience MCU Peter Parker. And I think that that's what's nice about Homecoming. We finally get to see, who is this guy, right? We saw him as Spider-Man, and he played Spider-Man in Civil War exactly as we would expect Spider-Man to be on the big screen. So it was great getting to see him in that bigger perspective. Now, I wasn't a big fan of No Way Home.
This is Mysterio.
Yes, because
Far From Home.
Sorry, you're right. Far From Home. Because I did not like the decision to take Peter Parker out of New York.
I thought that was interesting. I kind of like, it doesn't feel native, but it just feels like sometimes they got to change the settings. Like, in the MCU, he like goes to space in Far From Home, which is appropriately titled. He goes far from Italy. New York. Yeah. Like send him somewhere else. And I really liked Mysterio as a villain. I thought that worked really well.
I thought it was an interesting, way to make that character seem to work in the quote unquote real world. I mean, again, I actually love the character of Vulture in Homecoming.
Yeah, he was awesome. I mean,
Liz Allen's father, Vulture is such a joke in the comic book, an old man in like a suit, with goggles. And
no, I like how
Michael
they used
Keaton made him great and sympathetic.
What was the name of the organization that was like cleaning up the Avengers mess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What were they called?
I can't think of it, but yeah, essentially it was like,
I'm like, oh my God, how does this? Well, anyway, the point is, I really like how they tied that into the MCU, and they built the Vulture's character around this guy who's basically hoarding the Chitauri tech from the Avengers movie and using it for his own nefarious means, because he's a character that, I think a lot of us can relate to, in that he's gotten the shaft. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to be a villain because I've worked this job for so long and then I get fired. I pay my taxes and then I get screwed. Like, you know what? Screw it. I'm taking the stuff and I'm going to go rob a bank and live the good life. Like, and I'm not saying most of us would end up doing that, but I'm saying, like, I'm sure everybody's had a tinge of that feeling where you're like, the hell? Who is FICA? No.
No, so I like that. Again, Jake Gyllenhaal stepping in as Mysterio, kind of a weird, goofy comic book character when you think about how to present him in the real life. And again, they ground him in someone who's like, hey, I've gotten the shaft. I've been looked over. I've been taken advantage of. Like, I'm going to do something about it and step up and take what's mine.
Exactly. And then they tie that all the way back to the original Iron Man, which was pretty wild.
Which is interesting. Crazy and that far back.
They did fulfill the promise of the scene from Civil War with Robert Downey Jr. giving the presentation on that stage where he sort of recreates this environment and shows them all like a memory of his past. And they had said that scene was really important. Well, they had misled the fans a little bit into thinking that scene was relevant for Infinity War and Endgame. But it was important for a later movie, and we found out what that was, which basically it enables Mysterio to be Mysterio. And so they were setting up, a future villain there, but they just couldn't say what it was. But I think they messed up a little bit because they signaled that scene was important, and people thought that somehow they were going to use like the reality stone and combine it with like this Stark tech to like redo stuff.
It
wasn't all that. So
it wasn't
Mysterio
ended for up being cool. MCU narrative that we were expecting it.
So, but it did end up being important, which is, pretty cool. Speaking of Stark, what are your feelings about having him be Peter Parker's mentor, having all of his Spider-Man costumes sort of have Stark tech embedded in them? Obviously he crosses over and is in the Avengers movies, but generally speaking, he's almost like seeking out being an Avenger, particularly in Homecoming. So what do you think about Stark in the Spider-Man stories?
Personally, I did not like Stark being part of it. Obviously, later on in the comic books, Peter Parker and your Spider-Man and Iron Man cross paths many times, but I thought it was a disservice to the kind of kid with the backpack hero who Peter Parker is as a teenager.
Finally, we'll get to that question that I posed to you at the beginning, which is, how did you feel about No Way Home and the sort of combining of all three live action Spider-Man versions that we've had since the 2000s?
See, I don't know what you think. It's very hard for me to judge No Way Home as its own movie. And the only reason why is obviously it was a Spider-Man movie. I went into it, we were teased some big things. We went into it fingers crossed, but the way that it delivers so well is incredible. And I think what hits home is the fact that this Andrew Garfield arc is finally complete, that Tobey Maguire's arc is finally complete. So me as a big Spider-Man fan, I'm judging this movie on the fact that Sony is setting things right. It's kind of like X-Men Days of Future Past. I watched that movie and I'm like, thank you for listening to the fans and thank you for getting this right. But it's hard for me to divorce my strong feelings from them making things right versus it alone as a great movie. So I don't really know because I love it, but is that just because they finally closed off these arcs?
You're probably right.
Redemption to Doc Ock and Green Goblin and all these other villains who we'd met.
As the pinnacle of all the Spider-Man stuff that we've seen, there are a few things that do stand out to me that I think they did really well here. The first is the inversion of the Uncle Ben moment. With great power comes great responsibility. Mm-hmm. We never got an Uncle Ben in this version of Peter Parker. Although I think there are allusions, like suitcase labeled with like Ben Parker and different things. But clearly, as it's never been mentioned or even detailed in any way, even though Uncle Ben is gone, it does not appear that he was gone, sort of in this chronological order of Peter becoming Spider-Man. He's just not around. Yeah. And so he never had that with great power comes great responsibility moment. And I think the fans thought we've already seen this twice, so we can just safely assume that like he's had that moment. And so when they did it, it was actually somewhat shocking. Because nobody suspected that since Uncle Ben's already gone, that we would even get it at all. But second, they did it to Aunt May, which was really incredible. It was a powerful moment. I remember our theater was like, oh my God. Everybody was quiet and it was sad. But when she said the line, everybody was like, oh my God, this is Spider-Man right here. This is Spider-Man. Like you said, I think there are things about No Way Home and this sort of combining the different live action versions that it only pays out if you really liked the other versions.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could watch this as a standalone, but the novelty of it is like completely not there if you never watched any other Spider-Man movies. You're like, I don't know. So but I think that Aunt May moment hits really hard on its own. Like you don't have to have seen any other Spider-Man movie for, you to enjoy this one. Yeah, I think also in recognizing two things that you said it right, which was one, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker's got the closure that their series never did, which is Andrew Garfield, instead of losing Gwen Stacy, is able to save Tom Holland's version of MJ. The way the scene plays out and he is looking at her and is like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, it's a redemptive moment where you can see there's a catharsis for him, finally be able to not let that go, but move beyond it.
Yeah. Yeah,
and realize like I did do the best I could. Like I didn't do it on purpose, and I wish I could have saved her. And then for Tobey Maguire, there's this sense of him being able to sort of pass on what he has learned and sort of be the older mentor, Peter Parker, confront the Goblin again. There's a few things that I want to mention that they did really well, which is one, they positioned the Goblin again as Spider-Man's great nemesis, which was awesome.
I love that decision. Despite all the other 8 villains in the movie, he is still the major one.
So there's that. But the two things that really stand out are one, they had many villains in this movie and they finally realized how to do it without wrecking the plot.
Yep.
Which was awesome. I loved it. I was like, okay, finally, all these villains are here. They all have their role and it works, which in the other 2 attempts to have multiple villains failed miserably. Yep, they weren't able to manage the story. So here it works. And then 2, they rectify the problem that we discussed in last week's version of Spider-Man, which was that it was noted that a lot of these villains were often mind controlled or, not doing things sort of their own accord. And the movie addresses that head on with Tom Holland's Peter Parker saying like, instead of defeating these guys or sending them back to their death, why don't we try to cure them, to help them?
Yep.
And be able to return them to a reality where they can do good. I thought that worked too. So overall, yeah, I thought the culmination of all of these worked. And then they sort of get that reset moment at the very end where Tom Holland's Peter Parker / Spider-Man becomes the non-Stark Tech version of Peter Parker Spider-Man. He makes his own suit. He's listening to the police scanner and he's finally Spider-Man, the version that we know.
And I think that that's so crucial because again, right off the bat in the Tom Holland ones, we have Tony Stark playing a role, giving him technology, giving him information. He's embraced by the Avengers right off the bat. He gets the girl he wants. He has the life that Spider-Man does not have because, as you said, he's never the guy that
gets what he wants.
And so finally at the end, when he sacrifices himself for everyone, as Spider-Man does, he ends up being that Spider-Man that we all know and feel sorry for. The guy who doesn't have anything.
And I thought it worked really well. So the culmination of all this and where it goes next is interesting. I don't know where it's going to go next. But I think they were able to sort of pull it all off with No Way Home, going all the way back to bringing in, Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin again, sort of showing us that once that mind control element of Doc Ock is gone, he's able to actually help Peter because he's like, oh, I could do good with these things. I don't have to be this evil guy. And then you have them sort of course correcting on Electro, who was incredibly criticized when Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out. And they were able to give him the proper sort of comic book. They made him yellow. They made him look like the actual guy. And they didn't make Jamie Foxx. They were like, dude, embrace being Jamie Foxx. And you're like, hell yeah. So I like that he sort of got his moment. I think that's something. I think the character itself works, Electro, in that, here's this downtrodden guy he's never listened to, never had power. He's just trampled over in the street. And, Spider-Man's like the only guy that gives him a hello, hey, Max. All of a sudden, he's imbued with power. It seems that it might go to his head a little bit. seems natural.
Yeah.
And he likes it.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, man, I've never had power. And now I can do all this shit. They have Andrew Garfield actually talk to him. And he's like, I always saw you. And other people do too. You're not alone out there. And they're able to fix all that. It just worked. I loved it. It's great. Great comic book movie. But like you said, like Infinity War and like Endgame, it's a culmination movie that really, in order to enjoy the payouts, you know, the closing of story arcs, the arcs don't start and end in this movie alone. They literally go back for, you know, 7 other movies. So you sort of have to be in on Spider-Man live action.
Agreed.
All right, CP. Well, that actually does it. We just wanted to finish that conversation, which we didn't have quite enough time to dive all the way into last week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed us talking Spider-Man as much as we enjoyed going to the theater and watching it and then talking about it, which, CP, I don't know about you. I'm sure we could just probably just create a Spider-Man podcast. Just start reading the comic issues 1 week at a time and discuss them and watch the movies. I mean, I love Spider-Man. And I'm shocked we went over 100 episodes without really talking Spider-Man other than in Avengers.
I know, right? It is so crazy.
Thank you, Sony and Marvel and Disney, for re-releasing the movies in theaters and giving us an excuse to talk Spider-Man. To our listeners, be sure to continue the conversations. I'm sure there are other things about Spider-Man that we didn't get to. We couldn't talk everything Spider-Man, so let us know what your thoughts are, and if you have any questions, continue the conversations. You can follow the podcast at filmmakerscompass.com, where we have a feed of all of our previous episodes, as well as links to all of our social media, which is at Film Comp Podcast. So you can follow me personally at Big Kid D-Man and CP.
You can follow me at AndyCal5. Thank you for hanging out and talking Spider-Man with us. Make sure you let us know if you yourself are going to be participating in some Spider Mondays. Send us a pic. In the meantime, keep watching movies, and we will see you back here next week.